Yeah, absolutely.
This phone is twice as good quality as my professional camera.
That's pretty sad.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I should put my microphone up there? Yeah, you really should.
I suppose if they want to hear me. No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, now I think you're, I don't know, we're waiting for you.
I don't know. They said wait a few minutes, so I'm not sure.
Don't look at me because I'll really.
Yeah, I was ready.
She's gonna come right before you start. She's gonna bring her microphone. She's gonna have to put it up here.
Oh, sure. Good. How are you? Not sure where. I have to find a spot. Or if you want to touch it. Does that work?
I'm gonna attach it right here.
Okay.
Wait. Maybe. Y'all want to knock somebody else's off? Will that
That'll work.
stay?
Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay.
Yeah, that should be good.
Hopefully it stays. Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Present. All opposed? Present. Let's see, so Kevin Wu and Sarah Vaccarella are absent.
Approved. Approved absence. And then I'm gonna call to, the approval for an amended agenda so that a presentation from the Duluth Police Department can happen. And we will suspend the rest of our agenda for the duration of tonight. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Second that motion?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Alright, so we are the Citizen Review Board, and as a review board, attached to the Duluth Police Department, we're allowing the Duluth Police Department to come to our meeting today to do a presentation of their small unmanned aerial system, or drone, policy, that they are looking at doing, so, please, feel free.
I'm Mike Sanoa, Chief of Police, City of Duluth. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight to listen to our presentation, hear about this policy, have the ability to ask questions about our plans with this, and to also see how we've utilized them already underneath our Violent Offender Task Force, who has had a drone policy for quite some time. But what we saw is that we were starting to utilize them in other police calls, search and rescue, hostage situations, barricaded subjects, where we didn't want to put the life of an officer or a canine in danger. So we've had more deployments in the last 18 to 24 months with these irregular patrol functions. So we are looking forward to all of your feedback tonight. State statute requires us that we have at least a 2-week public comment period at a minimum. We felt it was very important to be at a public meeting, also to give people as many avenues as they could to discuss this. After this, and the 2-week public comment period after the meeting, because we'll leave it open, we will be on a council agenda most likely sometime in November, a council meeting, not an agenda session, where 2 things will occur. We'll be asking for a change in the retention schedule for evidence retention, because with drone video that is not utilized in a criminal case, it's a very short retention period. It has to be deleted off of our system. And then secondly, to have any additional public comment at a council meeting, because the city council approves our budget. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sergeant Jason Icum. Jason Icum is a supervisor on our night shift A-Watch patrol crew. He is also a team leader on our team commander on our tactical response team. He has been through the training to be a pilot. He is not a pilot, but he has worked in several of these cases where we have deployed unmanned aerial systems with a safe resolution. And also, prior to that, Jason served on our Violent Offender Task Force, where they utilize these on a much more regular basis. So I'll let Jason go.
Yeah, I was wondering, so you said that the department is going to be asking for a change to the document, the policy?
Not to the policy. The city has a data retention schedule that they have to publish as a city entity. We're governed by how long we retain certain data, not only by the city of Duluth, but also by Minnesota state statute. This is one that's governed under state statute that says, I think it's 7 days when it's not involved in a criminal investigation that we have to delete. Similar to our body worn camera video, if it's not attached to a case, it has to delete 90 days. If we still had license plate readers, that had to be gone in 60 days if it wasn't involved in a case. So different things have different retention. If it's involved in the case, we have to hang on to that until final adjudication of that case. So meaning probation, appellate routes, all of that's over in case somebody wants to appeal. So
So when when we're having a discussion after the presentation, the board and the citizens gathered have the opportunity then to suggest changes to the policy?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason.
All right, thanks, Chief. Thanks, everybody, for coming. A copy of the draft policies on the table back there, as well as a copy of this PowerPoint if anybody wants to read it. I'll go through the policy, and then we'll take questions at the end. So this is the policy on the small unmanned aerial systems. I'm just going to say drone because that's a lot to say every time, and everybody's typically used to hearing the word drone, so I'll just use that every time as we go through this policy. If I can get this to work. There we go. So drone operations, they're regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration. Pilots that we should have in the future with the department will have to go through and take the test to get a Part 107, a small UAS rule license, and we'll have to keep that current to operate drones for the city of Duluth. I believe it's every 2 years you have to recertify or take a test to keep your license current on that. Law enforcement use of drones is regulated by Minnesota State Statute 62619. It's the use of unmanned aerial vehicles. Our policy mirrors a lot of the information that's found in that statute. And then our pilots would follow FAA regulations, which would dictate the ceilings that they can fly at. And then we'd also follow Minnesota State statute and department policy. FAA regulations establish the best practices involving flight logs, training logs, and maintenance logs. DPD drone pilots are regularly trained both individually and as a team. Each pilot would have to maintain their own flight log, training log, as well as maintenance logs, and then the department as a whole has to report that every year to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, who then submits a report on drone usage statewide. I believe it has to be submitted January 15th from the department, and then I believe it's June 15th that the state report has to be published. Drone use requires a search warrant unless it meets one of the authorized warrantless use exceptions in Minnesota Statute 62619, Subdivision 3, and I'm going to go through those here in just a minute. The drone use must comply with FAA requirements and guidelines. Drones must not use facial recognition or biometric matching technology unless expressly authorized by a warrant. Drones must not be equipped with any weapons. Drones must not be used to collect data on public protests or demonstrations unless expressly authorized by a search warrant or one of the exceptions under Subdivision 3. So Minnesota Statute 62619, the reporting requirements, and this is what I was just talking about. Any police agency that maintains or uses a drone must report yearly to the Minnesota Department of Public Safety the following information, which would be the number of deployments without a search warrant, including the date and authorized use, and then the total cost of the drone program that the department has. Also in the statute, any judge that approves or denies a warrant for the use of a drone must report yearly to the state court administrator. The judge must give the information on that a warrant was applied for, the type of warrant, whether the judge granted the warrant, extended, modified, or denied the warrant, the offense specified in the warrant, and the law enforcement agency that was applying for the warrant. So these are the exceptions under that Minnesota statute where you would not need a search warrant to use a drone. It's during or in the aftermath of an emergency situation that involves the risk of death or bodily harm to a person, over a public event where there's a heightened risk to the safety of participants or bystanders, to encounter the risk of a terrorist attack by a specific individual or organization if the agency determines that credible intelligence indicates a risk, to prevent the loss of life and property in natural or man-made disasters, and to facilitate operational planning, rescue, and recovery operations in the aftermath of these disasters. To conduct a threat assessment and anticipation of a specific event, to collect information from a public area if there's a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, to collect information for crash reconstruction purposes after a serious or deadly collision occurring on a public road, over a public area for officer training or public relations purposes, and for purposes unrelated to law enforcement at the request of a government entity, provided that a government entity makes the request in writing to the law enforcement agency and specifies the reason for the request and proposed period of use. Documentation of each use per statute. You must have a unique case number. There has to be a factual basis for its use, which you would have to explain why, under the warrantless exceptions, that you deployed the drone. The application exception, unless a warrant was obtained. So you would have to explain why you're using the drone if you did not obtain a search warrant from a judge. And then that has to be reported to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension annually. Prohibited use of drones is random surveillance to target a person based solely on actual perceived characteristics such as race, ethnicity, religion, sex, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, economic status, age, cultural group, or disability, to harass, intimidate, or discriminate against any individual or group, to conduct personal business, or if you were to weaponize a drone in any way. So potential deployments that the Duluth Police Department may use a drone in are natural or man-made disasters. An example would be the flood that we had several years ago. That would be something that we would deploy a drone in to assess damage, roadways, safety. Large-scale events, Grandma's Marathon, Tall Ships, Bayfront concerts, inline marathon. Dignitary visits to Duluth, assisting the Secret Service. Tactical response team support, high-risk search warrants, armed barricaded suspects, hostage situations, crash and crime scene reconstruction and documentation, aid in locating missing persons, vulnerable adults, and suicidal subjects, high-risk patrol response, in-progress crimes of violence, searching for suspects, and canine support, foreign and domestic terrorism acts and threats, and surveillance of criminal suspects per statutory requirements. So the deployment process, if any unit is requesting the deployment of a drone, they would have to contact a supervisor, obtain approval from that supervisor to confirm deployment. Falls under DPD policy. The supervisor would then contact one of the remote piloting commands, one of the drone operators, to confirm the deployment. The piloting command would review the flight plan, confirm if the deployment is safe and feasible, which some of the problems that we could foresee is the location, the weather, and then the objectives of the drone deployment. And then the unit requesting the drone obtains a search warrant if necessary before deployment, confirms deployment meets warrantless deployment authorization under Minnesota state statute. So if they're not going to obtain a search warrant, we have to make sure it falls under one of those warrantless exceptions that's listed in 62619 subdivision 3. You have to obtain FAA and Duluth air traffic control approval. Depending on where the drone deployment would take place. Deployment flight is conducted with the piloting command, who would be the one operating the drone, and then there's always a visual observer who is basically observing for other obstacles in the air, other aerial, planes, helicopters, anything like that. That's what the visual observer is used for. And the piloting command can end the deployment at any time if they believe it becomes unsafe or unfeasible to continue. After deployment, flight logs are completed. Any evidence collected is downloaded. Police reports are completed. And any FAA reports are also completed. Drone deployments are reviewed biannually by Duluth Police Department. That would be every 2 years. The review includes FAA registration checks, Minnesota DOT registration checks, the FAA Part 107 license checks, make sure that everyone's license is current, flight log reviews to make sure that every flight that a drone is being deployed on is being logged, the maintenance log review, and then report reviews to make sure that police reports are being written when feasible when a drone is being deployed. These drones have electronic log inside of them, so anytime the drone is deployed, there is a record of it. You cannot deploy this drone without there being a record of the deployment. And that you cannot modify that in any way. So we have to make sure that the log that's in the drone matches up with the flight log or deployment log that we keep on file. And I'm just going to go over some deployments that we've actually used over the past several years. Drone deployments, as Chief Sanoa said, our Violent Offender Task Force has been using drones for a couple years. So I'm going to talk about some of the instances where we have deployed drones. One was the armed barricaded suspect. That was in Lincoln Park. That's where the suspect shot at officers, also shot and killed a police canine, and continued to threaten officers while inside the residence. Several drones were actually deployed inside the residence in an attempt to locate the suspect inside as he was moving throughout the entire structure. Barricaded suspect who was possibly armed. The drone was used to identify a window of opportunity to make an arrest after confirming suspect was not armed. This was up in the Piedmont neighborhood. A male refused to exit the residence, was possibly armed. Using the drone, we were able to determine that he was not armed, which allowed an arrest team to move in and safely apprehend him. High-risk search warrants. These are often deployed prior to any high-risk search warrant being executed, so we can see anyone who's coming or going from the residence to give officers real-time information on what's going on at the residence prior to executing any high-risk search warrant. The most recent one was us assisting, our tactical response team assisted the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office executing a search warrant for stolen firearms. And the drone was used to clear the attic. Instead of sending an officer up into the attic, which could be extremely harmful to them and very unsafe, as they have to, typically the first thing that goes through the attic is their head. So if somebody was waiting up in the attic, that could be very unsafe for any officer, so the drone was used to go up into the attic to ensure that nobody was there. Armed barricaded subject. This one occurred out in West Duluth. Suspect had attempted to rob a bank, attempted to carjack an individual. He was also firing his firearms inside the inside the apartment, including shooting at the drone while it was deployed. We've also used it in searching an apartment for a domestic violence suspect who was firing a weapon inside his apartment into the walls to make sure that no one was inside. He actually had left prior to our TRT, or actually our patrol response. So we were able to clear the apartment, make sure he wasn't inside prior to sending anyone in. The drone was used to assist our tactical response team in clearing the residence at the scene of a quadruple murder suicide. We were able to send the drone in without sending any officers in. It aided our patrol officers, a suicidal subject who had locked himself in a vehicle and had previously discharged a firearm inside the city. The drone was able to fly and see that the suspect did not have a firearm in his control, which allowed our tactical response team to effect an arrest of this individual from the vehicle without anyone being injured. It's been used for crime scene reconstruction involving multiple scenes of arson and a suicide attempt. And also it's been used by our Violent Offender Task Force on surveillance during controlled purchases of heroin and fentanyl from suspects with previous violent crime convictions, including one with a homicide conviction. Drones have become standard in modern police agencies across the United States. The benefits of the use of drone technology by police are numerous. Drones allow for police to search potentially dangerous areas without putting human or canine lives at risk. The cost of a drone is much cheaper than buying a helicopter or an airplane. And the use of drones is another example of the Duluth Police Department as a progressive police department using cutting-edge technologies and practices to try to keep our officers safe and the community safe. And this was actually prepared by another sergeant and an investigator from the police department. So that's the PowerPoints. If people have questions, I certainly answer them for you. Whoa. Yes, sir.
All of your pilots, police officers, or they're all members of the police department?
Yeah, currently we only have one pilot who's a police officer, and he's on the Violent Offender Task Force. But all of if the policy is approved, then all of the pilots will be Duluth police officers. If that answers your question. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of my primary concerns is the different authorized warrantless uses and how vague in general those are, and how it seems easy to mold those to fit most scenarios, particularly like conducting a threat assessment of a specific event and flying it over a public event where there's high risk to safety of participants and bystanders. And I heard you say that it's prohibited to use over protests except when there is like an authorized warrantless use. And so I'm curious, when drones are deployed without a warrant, will that information and the justification for why that choice is made, will that be available to the public?
Yes, I believe there is. I believe in the policy it talks about certain deployments. They would do a notification to the public of why it was deployed.
Will that notification to the public happen prior to the deployment or afterwards? Like,
It would.
this is what happened and here's why.
It would probably happen afterwards, I would imagine, depending on the scenario.
Because at the end of the day, we have to still report out the justified use that is fit within that. And the BCA can come back, other state entities can come back and say that wasn't what the intent of the legislature.
Is it more like, instead of like the other day, at the end of every 2 years, is that the feedback cycle?
No, these have to be, we have to post this, we have to put deployments in by January 15th at the end of every year, but I think every time we deploy, we're uploading a new document into the state system.
But it's not the review or like action on that. Yeah, the actual review occurs once a year.
The biannually is about our internal controls over maintenance of the drone, licensure of the drone, those types of activities. The state's doing this on a regular basis on deployments. So two separate kind of diverging.
So, follow up to her question. Right now, the policy only requires that you report to the state on the annual. Will you add into the policy what reporting you do to the public and to the city council? So when it is deployed? It seems like that's really important to have right in the policy. The actual reporting out to the community, not just the annual to the state.
Trying to see where it talks about.
Look at the very end, 606.8 reporting. That might be an area where that could be added, something describing exactly how the information is going to be reported to the public. Because right now it just says something about what, reporting to the state, I believe.
It is, yeah, it is just reporting to the state right now. I thought when I read through this, I saw something about notifying the public of certain deployments.
Anything in the policy right now.
Okay.
But at a certain point too, one of the things to remember is that this is used in a criminal investigation on a warrantless exception. We can't necessarily report that out because statute 13.82 governing public data in criminal investigation, we would need to do that. But if we ended up deploying for a protest where there wasn't a criminal thing after the fact, similar to what we're doing with protective gear, we could report out, here was the credible issue that we had, and put that out to the public.
Yeah,
Why
I
we,
would recommend, because the policy can state those exceptions of when it's part of the criminal investigation, nothing can be done until after that's all completed. So that can be spelled out in the policy, but I think it is really important with something like this, to have in your policy how you're going to report to the public.
But you wouldn't want to report it, or in certain instances, you wouldn't want to report it prior, because it might alert a criminal entity to,
And so,
we're being watched, and, you don't want to show your cards before you.
right, so you could specify in the policy that, after the event, then this is what, these are the kinds of things that would be reported, these are the kinds of things that can't be reported until after an investigation is complete. I've got a couple of other questions relating to the warrantless use. So the third one, to counter the risk of a terrorist attack by a specific individual or organization, the agency determines that there's a credible intelligence indicates risk. Why wouldn't that be a reason then to have a warrant? If you have credible intelligence.
It would depend on your time frame and if you would have time to draft a search warrant to use one. That could be, yeah, you could draft a search warrant, but again, it would depend on the time frame and what is the threat, when is the threat, all those would come into play in something like that. And if we had information on a credible terrorist attack, would we want to wait to get a search warrant? That's just delaying us possibly, providing some public safety.
I also have a question about the last one. For purposes unrelated to law enforcement, at the request of a government entity, provided the request is in writing and specifies the reason. So it doesn't matter, so it can be given for any reason as long as they tell you what the reason is. That's all that's required.
Under the state statute, yes. If a situation like that came up where somebody was requesting, I believe that there would be conversations had within the department before we would just fly a drone at the request of a government agency. I believe we'd have to have more information on why we would deploy a drone.
does it fit within the rest of that statute?
Yes.
As it's spelled out, does it require, what is the rationale or reasoning?
It'd be nice if your policy
Right.
was just a little, had some of those extra little protections, because that just sounds like really, really vague and subject to potential abuse. That you don't, if
Sure.
you don't have any control, because as long as they make the request and tell you why, you have to do it.
Well, we wouldn't have to do it, no.
You wouldn't have,
We wouldn't have to do it. That's just that's an exception to the search warrant requirement. But just because a government agency requested us to deploy a drone for them, doesn't mean that we would deploy a drone for them, depending on their reasoning why. So I could see where that, maybe clarifying that in the policy would be good.
And then the second one was over a public event where there is a heightened risk to the safety of participants or bystanders. And in your potential deployment list, you indicated large-scale events, large scams, marathon, tall ships, apron concerts. So then, would you be assuming always that there's heightened risk if you would be using it for those?
Typically, on those large-scale events, we get a threat assessment from the FBI of potential, threats towards those events. It doesn't mean that we would deploy a drone immediately, but we may have it on standby for a potential deployment.
So just the vagueness of some of this is really
Sure.
disconcerting.
Yeah, that's one of my primary concerns as well. It appears to me that there lacks detail in this document. So my first question is, how similar to the, I guess, final document is this, or is this a draft that will be expounded upon quite a bit before being considered official?
Well, I think that's why we're here tonight, is to get feedback about citizens' concerns. We've also had this posted up for the last month to receive citizen feedback as to what people are seeing in this, the policies been we're basing this policy off of state statute, we're also basing this off of how we have utilized these drones for the past several years with inside of this agency.
So to that end, I read a sentence like in 606.3. The use of the UAS potentially involves privacy considerations. It does involve privacy considerations. And that wordage that is all over here. There's weak wordage in this policy that allows for interpretation that I don't feel comfortable with. The expectation of privacy is something that we are developing in our legal system currently. The closest precedence I could find to this in researching this topic tonight was a case in which a person was observed growing marijuana in their shed by a police helicopter, and it set a precedence that you have no reasonable expectation of privacy when a cop is 400 feet above your home or protected airspace. That's the closest precedence I can find. That was written in the 80s. Drones are evolving every day, and the fact that privacy is being, in my opinion, not given the attention it deserves in this proposal is unacceptable. It needs to be better elaborated. It needs to be spelled out, because we have an opportunity to be a leader in this area. As citizens, we can use this technology responsibly. We can enable the use cases that you just described and that are important to protecting public safety, while also restricting ourselves, protecting ourselves, making sure that we have the right language in here to avoid some of these cases of, I think, self-moderation, or at least cases in which we don't have the legal basis to make good decisions on the timeframes that we're talking about. It just doesn't exist on a national level. Why are we, the small town of Duluth, even going to trouble ourselves with some of these things? Instead, I would appreciate it if we took a measured approach and increased capabilities over time, particularly in the area of unwarranted use, and led by example by putting citizens' privacy in those considerations first. The areas that I think are specifically lacking in this language is in particularly the privacy section, as you could probably deduce. And then it's all over the section about non-warranted use. So I know that this is reflecting the Minnesota statute on this. Are we open to augmenting that with additional protections, or is this effectively the most we can do in terms of self-policing ourselves? Is this the bar that we can go no higher, or are we open to more?
I think the fact that we're having this conversation suggests that we're open to that, right? We're taking public
issue, the statute 626.9, doesn't that specify all of that?
It specifies the detention time.
Now, I haven't read the statute, does
I think we do a copy set over there.
it cover your authorized use of the drone? In other words, if somebody comes to you and says, we need this to happen, fly the drone, whoever approves it knows the statute, would say, no, it doesn't meet the statute, you can't do it, or yes, it does. Now, without a warrant,
Correct.
otherwise you have to have a warrant. So, he's saying it's vague, but I would say maybe the statute covers all of that and make it friendly. Okay. So it's an improved statute.
But as you were saying, do we want to be more careful in the city of Duluth than what the state is saying?
Okay.
The state's only putting certain limits on, do we want to put in extra limits to really be mindful of the citizens' privacy?
I can tell you firsthand, as somebody who works on the cutting edge of technology, if we want to do that, we should treat privacy as the number one concern here. It is very important, and it's something that corporations screw up massively. The corporation I work for isn't perfect, and we have an opportunity to do it right, and I think that's very important. So, I mean, specifically, to collect information from a public area if there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, please define what reasonable suspicion means. Please provide guidelines that more specifically call out what that data collection means. And then, in your reports at the end of the year, how are we supposed to verify that data has been deleted on time? How are we supposed to, as citizens, confirm this if all we get is a count, effectively what looks like a spreadsheet readout of required reporting for the year? We need more visibility into the use of this from a privacy perspective. In Europe, this wouldn't fly. GDPR would prevent the storage of this data just wholesale on a number of different reasons. So let's have that thought exercise, or at least, I don't know, do it. Why are we burdening ourselves with that problem in the first place? Do we really need to? Let's just use this for warranted activities. And, the very obvious non-privacy related use cases like, in the aftermath of an emergency. And don't trouble ourselves with the legal debate even of what the definition of privacy is. We should restrict that.
I have a follow-up question to something that the chief had said. He said after the test, if there was not a criminal ongoing investigation, you all could release, why you chose to use it and information about that. Is it that you could make that choice, or is that under this policy, if it's not part of the criminal investigation, you would be obligated to make that public?
Be considered public data at that point.
Okay,
So
it would be
until,
for sure.
yeah, and not that we would have the footage because we have to delete after 7 days, and we can say, here's why we deployed this. We had this event occurring, we knew that we had people demonstrating, but we also knew there was a counter group. And we were concerned about this, so we were trying to just gauge where people were and how things were going, and if we had adequate resources to keep those two groups apart.
I had another question, about, I think, probable cause. I'm not a lawyer, so if I flub the language, you might have to help me out a little bit. But, so for example, if you did have a warrant, and there was an ongoing investigation for somebody, and this person was walking down Superior, or London Road, or some busy street, you get footage of them, and it is a part of this ongoing criminal investigation, so keep it past the 7 days. But then later, maybe there's a report of an unrelated incident in that same area, and you have access to this footage. And all of these people that were also happened to be near this person on the street, there was no probable cause for suspicion of them, there was no warrant for them, they're just citizens living their lives. What does that look like in terms of accessing that data? Does that turn all those people into pre-suspects? Can you use that in a criminal investigation? Or
We couldn't use it. I mean, if at the time we're up on a different event and something criminal happens in front of us, that's one thing, but we couldn't go back after the fact to say, here, we've now found out about this.
okay.
if we're using it under this exception, under one of these exceptions, like you're saying, we're using it for surveillance of a known criminal suspect, we would have reasonable suspicion to believe is conducting criminal activity, which is a standard. It's, Cherry V, Ohio, that's, where we get reasonable articulable suspicion from. That we can follow that person and deal with what's going on with them.
I've got a follow-up to what she was saying, to her first, so you made a comment that this would be public data, but there's a difference between something that's public data and the only way that the public can access it is to put in a specific data request. I think that this should go beyond that and actually be the use of the drone, the uses of the drone be proactively reported out to the community, not wait for the community to have to ask for it. So there is a difference between just being public data.
I think there's a possibility that we could report, UFC, we had a copy of the form that the state requires. I don't think that's the problem of us presenting that after usage. That it may be very limited because of a criminal investigation, but,
I just want to make sure that's clarified that just because it's public data doesn't mean you would automatically share it with the public.
Correct.
And I think that that should be allowed.
But I think we have demonstrated that we tend to share a lot of data out to our community.
I would like to share an anecdote on that. So I lived in California prior to this, and when protesting was happening, etc., there were often helicopters flying around in patterns and circles, and it was incredibly frustrating not being able to figure out why those helicopters were there. And I tried very hard, and my neighbors tried very hard. So to your point on how difficult it is to understand why these things are happening, it absolutely should be a first consideration that we need to, this at the end of the day is to put citizens at ease, to protect our community. And part of that means not intimidating the community behind, this wall of access. Because we will want to find out that information, and if we can't, it doesn't feel good. and I know that during these protests, I was just taking my kids to the park. I know that I'm a good law-abiding citizen on the highway. It has nothing to do with my own concerns about privacy at that point. It's more about, it's just weird. It doesn't feel good as a community to have that happen. And we want to be very careful about how often and how we do that. The last point I'll make on all of this is that you guys have got a big task ahead of whoever gets to lead this program. I mean, all of this stuff being punted to a future position doesn't sit well with me. It seems like all of these things that are going to be, this person is going to be responsible for developing should be developed beforehand as part of the proposal itself. I don't think that you can reasonably mix things like developing a uniform protocol for submission with the addressment of a lot of these risky ideas like deployment of UAS shall require authorization of chief. I mean, that just shows that somebody has thought about the risk of some of these situations, but we're ultimately going to expect somebody else to do this work later. It needs to be done before. And the fact that we are in the midst of a difficult time hiring for our local police, how do we expect to reasonably staff this and accomplish all of these responsibilities at the utmost quality that we deserve?
I don't know if I'm understanding what you're asking.
Is all of this position
All
expected to be
those
done
things
before
are
the
currently happening under task force.
Okay.
And that's what we would replicate that's already occurring within our agency.
So then why don't these things exist in a more specific fashion? If these protocols exist in the other task force, why isn't that in this proposal?
Because there's policy and then there's operating procedures.
examples of our previous deployments through our task force that were presented over the past few years, not very many deployments over a long period of time. Every time we fly a drone, there will be a documented reason as to why, whether it meets the without a search warrant exception or whether we apply for a search warrant to fly it. So every time we fly one, it will be for a specific reason. It's not part of any general surveillance of the city or citizens in our community without specifics. So to differentiate between what you commented on about helicopters flying in some of these large metropolitan areas, those are part of regular patrols at times, and they might respond to a specific police call or police activity to provide support to the officers that are on the ground. We are not going to fly drones just as general surveillance or curiosities. Every time we fly one, it's going to be reported on to the state. It will be either public on the onset because of the circumstances, or would become public after the adjudication of criminal case. So I think we're going to be able to catch some of your concerns and some of the concerns I'm hearing here in regard to whenever we fly one and documenting why the reason we did fly one. I understand, I hear the things that you're talking about, but I want to try to answer to that a little bit as I can.
I think that we ultimately agree very much on the reasons to use this. I think I didn't see a single reason out there that I disagree with. And wholesale, I think that this technology is very valuable for the law enforcement community and can be used responsibly. I challenge us to codify that in the policy. Because I don't know you, but I trust you. I trust that you will operate responsibly. But we should go one step further and put that in writing. And it's not here. It's not in this policy. It's not here.
I'm Steve Braden, one of our police lieutenants, saying on my own. I apologize for that. Policy language that gets to be very, very, very specific gets to be difficult because then it sometimes as well, it wasn't quite here, but resulted in a valued flight of one of these drones. So I understand in regard to capturing some of this in language of policy, but there does also have to be a little bit of broad open-endedness to it with a balance of what's appropriate for public privacy, public input, and our needs. And having these discussions like we are today and hearing concerns and hearing and offering some of the reasons why we've used them in the past are very valuable. So that's why we're doing that today. And so your thoughts are very appreciated. And the conversation, like the Chief said, doesn't end today. We still have an open comment period. We'll approach the City Council in a regularly scheduled meeting. And so your concerns are heard and understood. And by all means, I'll get you my contact information if you'd like to provide some information directly to me. But these are good conversations to have. And I just want to try and, as best we can, let our community know that we will fly these things only in specific circumstances, which were kind of outlined today. They will not be just flying around the city out of curiosity. That's not going to be, because that does become a privacy issue. But we are going to fly them for specific reasons. And like we saw in our previous deployments, many of them had to deal with situations that protect lives, save lives. And we found that to be very useful in our partnerships with the task force and St. Louis County. So I hear your concerns, and maybe there's some room in the middle for us to meet on some of that. So good points.
And I would also say, with the exception of when we are flying those into a residence or hostage rescue or getting low into cover for search and rescue, the height at which that flies, the video is an identification quality.
I have on a very similar drone. I'm an aviation enthusiast and tech nerd. I'm perfectly suited for this conversation.
So I'm just saying, like, when we use that to surveil, like, and we talked about going after a fentanyl dealer with previous homicide conviction, that's from a high height, and they're able to follow a vehicle, watch him do hand-to-hand exchange and pick them off in a safe location where we're going to.
Is that a DJI drone? By chance? Do you happen to know the program?
Yes.
Yeah. It's my understanding that those were just outlawed by the DoD in the beginning of October. There are major concerns over DJI as a both human rights violating company
have a question about warrantless monitoring. When exactly, how long does it take to assess that there is no threat and your drone is ceased from monitoring? So if you have an event where someone, a group of people are gathering and there's a concern, it starts at 12, it ends at 3. What does that drone monitoring look like to say, oh, this is not a situation that needs further monitoring? So is it a constant assessment of the whole event? Or is it just, I would like to hear how that works.
It would be constantly assessed. So as soon as we deployed the drone, if we don't see any need to continue the deployment, I'm not sure exactly the situation you're talking
I'm
about.
not, hypothetically speaking, it's going to happen at some point, I imagine.
Sure. Are you talking like say a violent group, maybe fighting or?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if the police department is concerned about a particular threat, and I heard you say something about FBI, so I don't necessarily need to get that deep, but how long, if this event is 4 hours, is it monitored for 4 hours, like consistently, or is it like, okay, we've had a drone up there twice in the area, we don't see anything, we can move on, or is this something that the DPD will continually go back to in that 4-hour event to continually monitor?
Well, it would be hard to say. It would depend on the situation, because we may do that. Over 4 hours, we may continue to deploy it depending on what the threat is and, you know, what we're seeing when the drone is deployed. Now, if we were to deploy it and we see no credible threat of any sort, and then we would end the deployment. We would have to constantly reassess, because it's hard to say in a hypothetical situation how long we would put it up for. But if there's no reason to deploy it and we don't see any threat that we would need to use it for, then we would end the deployment.
So if you had a concern from a different outside agency, would that heighten the level of monitoring or duration of monitoring that you're willing to put forth?
It would depend on what the.
So if the FBI came and said, this is a group we're concerned about, they're going to be in town being anti-protesters to this political ideology, would the DPD say, okay, this is something we need to monitor in totality, or is this something that we'll just keep an eye on from a distance?
We would probably keep an eye on from a distance, but we would probably use actual human intelligence where we would deploy officers of some sort, either plainclothes in some sort of.
It could be that situation, think of a large-scale protest, and now a group in the middle starts breaking out and fighting or starts property damage. We may, based on what the officers on the ground are saying, we may put a drone up, assess the situation, try to identify people who are causing harm to individuals, acting violently towards individuals, starting to destroy property, bring the drone back down and use our officers then to deploy it in an arrest team, make an arrest, move out. If that kind of answers your question.
It's all new, right? So it's just trying to figure out what circumstances actually are going to.
We didn't use it. We utilized street cameras, but
Yep.
you know, one of our protests after the murder of George Floyd, there was a small group that started to damage some property, started to break some things, started to kind of go after some people. That's one situation where I could have seen maybe we could have put that up, found a safe time to grab the individuals away from the larger group and allow the rest of the protest to go on.
So when you have a situation where there's just an impromptu gathering, is that going, when you have a situation where there's an impromptu gathering, who's making the decision that says, okay, this requires some sort of aerial surveillance? Who makes that decision?
Be the watch commander, so the lieutenant in charge.
And that's just based on his or her professional experience?
And ultimately, it is the pilot in charge. So it's going back to somebody who has been through the FAA training, has their DOT cert, has all those things to come back and say, yeah, this fits the statutory requirements, this is within our policy, and this is deployable based on conditions and situations. So it's a request from somebody at a leadership level to ask the expert, you know, the subject matter expert, that, what are your thoughts?
Have there ever been cases where that's happened, where the pilot has rejected requests?
I don't know of any. I also don't know where we've flown it over any sort of group gathering or anything like that.
We haven't deployed at events, group gatherings. For us, you know, it has been, I mean, largely what you saw here, or for operations involving a criminal target.
Would you listen, now you say large-scale events, Grandma's Marathon, there's no credible threat reported that you know of. Would you fly the drone just for public safety over the venue of Grandma's Marathon? You could watch for injuries, something going on, somebody might decide to do something. Would you fly the drone like Bayfront concerts? Would you fly the drone over there?
We have not yet. I mean, it's obviously, it's a possibility underneath the Minnesota statute. But we haven't had events that have garnered that worry. We rely on resources on the ground.
Okay.
You know, at the same time, a lot of those commercial events are paying for and flying drones over the entire event and can notify us as well of an emergent situation.
So because it is a good eye in the sky for a huge crowd like Bentleyville a couple years ago, when there was 18,000 people. It would have been nice to have some, you could only see so far in the crowd of a police officer.
Yep.
Would you fly a drone over something like that?
For
for eyes?
so Bayfront, we wouldn't. We've deployed higher end cameras
Okay.
on top of those towers and through a port security grant, so we can monitor that from our command post within that venue.
So unless there's a credible threat on Grandma's Marathon, you wouldn't fly.
Yeah, I don't see a situation
We-
where we would.
We've had it at Grandma's Marathon just in case of, you know, some sort of emergency, but we've never deployed it just to fly over the crowd
So
to
you
to
had
look
it
for
there-
potential problems, because we have people on the ground walking through the crowd. I know this year we did have a missing child, and we were talking about putting the drone up to try to find the child during Grandma's Marathon. That was one of the circumstances where we had talked.
It would be available on site if
He would be available on site if there was an issue, but we did not fly it over the crowd just to look for potential threats. We used people on the ground walking through the crowd.
So I'm wondering, I'm assuming that you're recording this session, that a transcript will be created? And how do we access that transcript then?
The Facebook Live has a transcript with it, so it just automatically does that for it.
Oh, okay, so
Yep.
right now a transcript is being made?
Yep,
Okay, but it doesn't say who's speaking necessarily unless that.
It doesn't,
person is
no.
a man or something like that?
Yep.
And then are you gonna create an internal transcript that would be more readable or something like that, or?
I don't know if we have the ability to pull it.
yeah, I don't know if I have that your time on my hands.
But we could find the transcript recorded on
Yep.
Correct.
Facebook.
It'll be on Facebook.
Tomorrow or something like that.
Yep, I'll
Yeah.
put it up tomorrow, I'll work on it tonight, and then it'll be on our Facebook page, it'll be on our website, and then the CRB's website as well, and our YouTube channel. So there'll be a variety of channels for you guys to access, for anybody to access.
Okay, well, so what I'm wondering as we're all sitting here and talking, most of the people who've spoken have brought up stuff that I was gonna bring up, so that's good for me to hear, just that I think a lot of people have similar thoughts right now, concerns about this draft. But so are we to then understand that you've given us the opportunity to speak with you and share this? And then you're gonna decide whether or not you take any of our recommendations, and then we'll just see what you end up presenting to the city council? Or will there be an opportunity for more of a back and forth, like, okay, we looked at everything that you brought up, here are our responses to those things, therefore, we're going to include this in the document because of what you brought up, or we're not going to include this in the document because, and here's why. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You know, I think our plan will be to take recommendations that are reasonable, that don't restrict this to a point where it's unusable from a safety consideration for our community and for police officers that work here, and make those adjustments in the policy. our policies are public. This one has to be public, up even after this, so it will be part of our list of policies that are there for people to grab.
Would you commit to publishing something like you described, like a change log or something to indicate that you processed and updated the document so that, I can watch the webpage and look for an update, but I don't have
Sure.
to necessarily read that PDF every day looking for a change?
I understand that. I think that we can do that once we can put out the final version with edits and put out a notification if that's occurred.
Okay, and so that would happen before it gets approved by the city council?
Correct.
Okay. All right, well then, the main thing.
And what I will say is, the policy doesn't need city council approval. It just needs to have a public comment period in front of council. So statute doesn't require an approval process. At this point, we're not looking for funding from city council to expand the drone program. We're looking to add on additional pilots outside of the offender task force, because what we have seen and our concern is that with one pilot, if we have a deployment and that person, or we need to deploy and that person's unavailable, we don't want to be readily reliant, much like everything else when we've had some of these other debates of these kind of more sensitive nature. We don't want to be relying on other agencies within the area to come in and operate underneath their policy and not one regulated by our police department, our supervisors, our leadership team. That's why we try to get out in front of these things and make sure that we have available resources so that we're operating underneath our community expectations. Because anytime an agency comes into town here to do this, they operate underneath their policy. We don't have authority once we enact that mutual aid. So that's why these things are important for us to have within our wheelhouse, within our toolbox to help people in our community.
Just out of curiosity, when monitoring a public event, warrant regardless, does the public have access to that space as well? So if the DPD is monitoring grandmas, do people in the public also get to have their drones up as well, or do you own that particular space and time when you're monitoring something?
No, the public would be able to launch a drone unless you establish like a no-fly zone.
Okay, so that's a better question. Do you establish no-fly zones when you do?
I don't know that we've ever established a no-fly zone over an event.
Okay.
I shouldn't say, the only time that would probably happen is if the president is here, and then I would imagine the Secret Service.
Most of them get taken down by birds. They don't
I would imagine the Secret Service would enact one of those, but not us. I'm not aware of us ever enacting a no-fly zone.
And in our presidential event visits, they've never asked us to deploy our resources. They're flying their own.
So, Chief, you brought up a good point. Are there other law enforcement agencies within St. Louis County that have drones and are actively using them?
St. Louis County has a very large contingent of drones. St. Louis County Sheriff's Office. Across the bridge, Superior Police Department has a large contingent of drones. I don't know about Hermantown or Proctor.
Not that I know of.
But I think most rely on the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office is our go-to, our backup. They've been on a lot of these deployments with us. Fire Department, the Duluth Fire Department also has a drone program, and have had a drone program for a long time. They're not regulated like us. So this is a relatively new statute. I felt that it was important that even though we had this program established within the Violent Offender Task Force, that it came out within the public eye for this. Because we were going to do it within the entire department and not just try to keep it within something that existed pre-statute. Some of you are probably aware, maybe you're not, but this is the first time this is relatively new statute. Statutes around body worn cameras became even more regulated because of privacy concerns like Tim has addressed, which has made that much more difficult for the public to get access to those videos because that is all considered private data and only the data subject is entitled to that view. This is a little more open-ended. It kind of runs under like fleet video and our in-car cameras. That's not regulated. It's in a public space. ALPR, automatic license plate readers, that is also regulated. Both body worn and ALPR has a biennial audit that has to be conducted by an external source. The drone policy, the drone statute isn't quite there yet. I would anticipate at some point the legislature would do that to make sure that we are complying through a third-party regulator that we have deployed, we have deleted, we have done all of that.
Clear that doesn't exist.
Not currently under the statute as I read it. I didn't find language related to that.
It's unfortunate.
But that's important to share, that if there is a drone deployed, it may not be one from the DPD. There are other agencies that are currently flying
Well,
and
there's
using drones.
private people have drones.
Mhm.
When you buy them online, you don't know whose drone it is.
We might.
Huh? Could be yours.
Oh, sorry, Anderson?
Somebody calling you up.
Yeah, I just wanted, if you could please confirm, so, at the beginning of the evening, you said there will be some reason to, that issue coming to the council, but then now you're saying that the council is not necessarily a council approval of this policy. What is the action that you will bring to the council?
So the one action that would be brought to the council is related to data retention. That's a city policy ran out of the city attorney and the clerk's office. So they need to change the language in there related to add language saying 7-day retention for non-criminal activity. But when you read the statute under public comment, there's two things that are required. One, that at a minimum you take public comment either electronically or by mail, and that you allow for public comment with the legislative body in charge of your budget. But it doesn't necessarily talk about approval or disapproval. It just talks about the ability for the public to comment. So the council could take action saying, create a resolution or an ordinance on drones. That's, well within the legislative body's right. But as far as the policy would necessarily need that sort of like approval piece, it's kind of, to me, it's probably a part that's lacking within the statutory requirement. So we've tried to follow the statute. We've also tried to look at other agencies that have similar programs or policy and model ours after what's already existing within the state.
So a clarification. In whatever ways that you amend this draft, will that happen? And so when it goes to public comment in front of the city council, will that be a revised draft, or will that comment just be based on this current language now? Will that be an opportunity for the public?
Yeah, I
to
think
see
that
how you have
I think there's an additional opportunity there to add additional language or changes.
Will that be an already amended version, or will it be this exact version?
We will probably amend this
Okay.
in the coming days to add some
I'm happy to hear it.
to try to address when we would publicly post some of those logs and how we would do that, because it's the pilot in charge has to do that right away, right? We're saying that we want that done, but it's not necessarily going to the state till a later time, so.
So the pilot in charge is also FAA approved, licensed, but he's also has to know all the statutes and everything in order to fly. So it's
Correct.
kind of gotta be a smart guy.
Correct. Yeah, and the class is not an easy class. They have a fail rate. So,
So Chief, you talked about the data sheets that need to be filled out. Is that something that can be included on the information that you send to the CRB every
could do, I think that's something we could produce.
Depending on the scenario for that deployment, if it still is a criminal matter, it's not public. If it's a public matter, it's public, and we can provide that.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, if we could just add that to the reports that we're getting. What is law?
That's the biggest thing that I see here is that, obviously there's some leeway, like you, Steve, were saying, there needs to be some leeway so that you're not restricted too tightly, so that you can, react to a situation appropriately without feeling like you're going outside of the policy. But I think what would make me comfortable and what is like our job as the citizen review board is to help build trust with the community. And as a community member, the way that the department could do that for me is to say, we're gonna report out every single thing that we do, except for something obviously that's still part of the criminal investigation and jeopardize that somehow. We're gonna report out every single thing that we do to the public in a very accessible format, on our website, et cetera, on a regular basis, so that the public can go, oh geez, there was a protest going on, I was walking my kid to the park, and these things were just all over the place, what was going on there? And I can go within, a 3 to 6 month period and find information and say, oh, okay, that's when that drone was flying in this area, and now I understand why that's going on. Just that in itself, for the public, is gonna make people go, oh, okay, thanks for letting me know that, I trust you. Versus, well, if you'd like to see this information, you have to file a document, blah, blah, blah. That just makes people distrustful.
Yeah. And I will say there probably won't be a ton of reported things.
Right.
'Cause I can't report on the violent offender task force because those are used criminally. And then our deployments are pretty well restricted to these, not restricted, we have not chosen to deploy them in these other things that have been brought up tonight, but we have utilized them and has been on hostage situations, barricaded subjects, missing person cases.
So are you saying that there are a lot of situations where you wouldn't be able to report out the usage?
I'm saying that there wouldn't be a lot to report out on.
Just because it's not getting used that much?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. I'm sorry, that's what I'm trying to say is like, I don't want to develop a public expectation that you're going to see this report every month and be like, yeah, we got nothing to report.
Right,
You know,
I totally
that-
understand that, for sure.
I think you've all seen it with protection here. I think we've maybe delivered 1 or 2 reports to the CRB since we brought that. Oftentimes we're not even staging it. It's set up here, it's there in case, and drones are similar. We do think there are situations though where we have had missing persons, persons threatening suicide in remote areas where this would be easy to get up and get up quickly, get eyes on, to try to start communicating with individuals who are going through mental health crisis that we haven't been able to do. So you may see it more in those situations but we have. And like I said, we have utilized DFD in the past, St. Louis County Search and Rescue, St. Louis County Sheriff's Office.
Yeah, no, I think everybody agrees that there's lots of good situations for you to make your own choice without asking anybody else.
Right.
We should use it right now to save somebody's life and to protect an officer's life. Amen. Okay. But I think that transparency, making sure that it's transparent so that the public continues to feel comfortable with it, especially at a moment in our national history where there's so much distrust of the police department and police departments, to just be all the more transparent with this,
Sure.
The better. So, I really think you should have something in that area where it says, reporting out that last piece, that says, and here's how we're going to report out to the community. And here's how we're going to release this information publicly. And then the other point that was brought up about, that came to my mind as well, we're going to hire a program coordinator and they're going to develop all these things. It's like, okay, well, what are those things? Because that's all really important too. So if you already have a blueprint for that you're going to work off of anyways, then to put that in there and say, these are the protocols, then that again is more transparency, and it's just clear to people, okay, here's how it's going to be used. So, you know, and then if anybody has questions about, well, it's flying over, you know, Bayfront Jazz Fest, and we're all suspicious that the police are just using this to look for somebody smoking a joint or something like that. Okay, I can go and look and see that, okay, they flew it for 15 minutes because they heard that somebody was being beaten by a group of other people. You know, and then it's like, okay, you know, so does that make sense? Yeah, I really think that needs to be clear. Both of those things should be clear in there.
Sure.
And there's more opportunity after this to give you feedback, so I could write up some written feedback, submit it to you, and then you would look at that, and would I get feedback on that then? Once I send you the feedback, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think we could do that. It's not an
Okay.
overarching issue.
All right.
And
And then-
I want to be clear, this isn't hiring a program coordinator. This is an existing person within our agency
Right, right,
who's already here, and not, this is an other duty as assigned
right.
type of situation, right? That you will also make sure that you're checking these boxes, making sure these things are being done,
Well,
utilized.
but most of the description underneath that says developing protocol. And so just saying what that protocol is
It already
Sure.
in
exists.
the document would be helpful, because it feels like developing protocol, well, we've got drones, we're gonna fly them, and we're gonna develop protocol as to how we're gonna do that. It feels like that's what's being said.
Sure.
Versus, we've got drones, we've got a protocol, and here's the protocol. See what I mean?
Yep.
All right.
So following up to what Blair is saying, earlier you didn't think there's certain kinds of things that you don't want to see in a policy because the policy needs to be updated, but maybe when this is presented to the city council, you not only have the policy, but you also have, and here's the anticipated protocol, and share both of those with the public when it comes to the city council.
Sure.
That will help the public have a better understanding how to be used, and that those details don't necessarily have to be in the policy, but you could still share that
Yep.
out with the public in its own separate protocol.
I think I agree that the transparency of data and making sure that it's really easily accessible to people is important, but I'm also curious, you mentioned that like automatic license plate readers already have requirements to like do that procedure and that used to be audited by a third party company, and or we anticipate that also being the case with drones in the future. And I'm curious, like one, is that something that you all could get ahead of? And even though it's not required at the state level, put it within your own internal policy and find some sort of like third party monitoring, because I think I hear that it's important to not release public information about ongoing criminal investigations. That makes sense. And also, I think it makes me nervous with these broad, like warrantless exceptions. The idea that just you all internally will be monitoring yourself as opposed to a third party. And so I'm curious, is that possible? Are there barriers to that happening? And also, would you be able to release information about ongoing criminal investigations to that third party because it's not publicly available, or would that also not be allowed?
Would not be allowed to be distributed to that third party. We're running into some of that with the RBA based on some of the data that we would like to be able to use, but because of statutory requirements, it's difficult. There's a financial burden to having a third-party auditor come in and do that, and there's probably not a protocol established currently that may hit what they're looking for. Unlike, I mean, there's statutory requirements about what needs to be reported out in those biennial audits currently per the Minnesota legislature and the administration of legislation.
I'm not sure I'm quite understanding. So so drones you said are like widely used in lots of different police departments across the country. Are there third-party auditors that exist for
Not that I'm aware of.
any police department anywhere that just doesn't?
Not that I'm aware of. Not currently in Minnesota that I am aware of.
Sorry, in Minnesota or just like anywhere?
Haven't looked that far, but I'm saying in Minnesota, not that I'm aware of.
I would really appreciate, as a community member, something that would make me feel more secure, is that like in future budgetary discussions or in future planning, if that was research that could be prioritized, I think a third party
some public information because it's not related to a criminal investigation. But then after a criminal investigation is over, then the information becomes public, or does it just stay non-public? I'm not-
Eventually it becomes public, but it may be years.
As far as long as there's litigation still.
Correct, or in case of a homicide or a criminal sexual conduct, there's not statute of limitations. And there's also things that are outside of the normal appeal routes of 90 days that come into factor for that.
So there's a lot of that's and ifs and.
Well, there's just a lot of moving parts within the criminal justice system to protect the rights of the accused as well.
Yeah. Right.
So just so we know, how long will it be up on the website? How long is the open comment period?
There'll be an additional 2 weeks from today.
Okay, so mark
So-
that. And encourage family, friends to also go and make comments.
So until, it'll come down on the end of November 9th, so the 10th.
Okay. And then this will be made available by tomorrow?
Yep. Well, we're
Um,
gonna tonight, it should be uploaded on our website tomorrow.
And what are the 4 areas?
Face, 4 areas for people to comment.
All right, to hear this conversation.
It'll be on our Facebook page, on our website, duluthmn.gov/police, the CRB's website, as well as our YouTube channel.
Excellent.
Where would we find it on the UPD website?
Right up front,
It's right up front.
right on this main page.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good.
Yep.
I just was gonna say at the time, there's a lot of, like you were saying, I think oncology is an upcoming thing, people's current needs, and not just blood flow, it's all over, but I'm thinking that it might be beneficial, obviously, policies are a living, breathing thing that can be amended, changed, edited. It might be beneficial for us to talk about going a year after this has started, to have a whole group of public to come to a public hearing, and everybody gets to sit down and say, over the last year, we've used these times, let's look at these, let's talk about it, because then we have history that we're looking at, that we're able to talk to and see if there's some issues we start to develop. I mean, a lot of it right now is hypothetical, and it's great to have these conversations, but I think an after action report, a year after the policy's enacted, for us as a community again, sit down and say, here's the times that were used, here's the protocols, procedures. I think that will really help people better, it will for me, understand what's really going on, so it doesn't have to be both either or, it can be both and. We can do this on the front end, but still schedule something in the future to do an after action review of this and that, and answer a lot of people's questions. Right now, it's kind of hypothetical, but let's see as it starts to develop and get used, let's come back to the table and have another discussion. Just a thought, and I think it might be good to try to schedule something like that, or just put it on our agenda for maybe a year from now or whatever. And come
Yeah,
back and
I was gonna ask
revisit this and do an after action report.
I was gonna ask if
Here's-
CRB would be willing to be the venue for that.
Absolutely. I think we're the perfect venue to host something like that again and have another public discussion about it. Let's just see where we're at. Make them available.
One more thing that I don't understand is, and I think this is not me for misunderstanding, but I was under the impression that like this meeting needs to happen by distraction because there's some sort of expansion of the drone program, but I think that you were saying that it's not necessarily expansion, you're not asking for like additional resources, you're just training more pilots. And it sounds like it's already been happening, but not so much. Like, do you anticipate, is this because you anticipate an increased usage, or why are you mandated to have this meeting or this new policy?
So, when this was originally done, under the Violent Offender Task Force, or Lake Superior Drug and Violent Crime Task Force at the time, that was the Offender Task Force, there was no statute. We had internal policy and controls over this, so it was done out of that unit. Over the past, like I said, over the past 18 to 24 months, we have had a need to utilize this in situations in order to save lives, to slow things down, to have an opportunity to look at things from different viewpoints. And we started utilizing this in more venues outside of the Violent Offender Task Force. When I was patrol deputy chief, I saw us doing this and said, I think now we really need to look closer at this statute and bring this out into the forefront, so that people have an opportunity to know that this is existing, that it's existed. So how I look at it is really a new program for the department, and that's what the statute talks about and establishes, that creation of a new program, you need to have this public comment period, you need to have a public meeting, and so that's why we did this, in order to make the public aware that this is out there, and that it has been out there, that we have been reporting out based on statutory requirements, and now we just want to be able to utilize it more. We see a need where, like I've said before, one pilot for a community our size, running 24/7 operations. When I say just a 24/7 operation, not drone operations, 24/7 operations, things happen, emergent things happen. The ability to be able to deploy that with a trained operator, trained observer, quickly in an emergent situation, so that as we are bringing in resources, bringing in additional resources, we know what to bring, what we're going to need to deal with the situation, and have a good idea of what we are getting, or what we are going into.
So it's not necessarily going to be acquiring more drones or more equipment, but with the equipment you currently have, there might be using it more with more people who will be trained?
We will eventually be acquiring more equipment, because ideally we would have this deployed across all 4 of our patrol crews that work different days, different times, that equipment would be available for those crews, ready to go. Also, what we have seen in these deployments is these often crash inside, especially when we're inside a residence. They go down. Batteries die at inopportune times, and we need to redeploy another drone. When we've had situations where we've had to do like limited entry into a situation, we've stepped on them. We've ran them over with other technology that we have or the county has. So, there's those processes that you need to, go back and put a new one up, or one's defective. And, so oftentimes right now as it sits, when we deploy these, we are bringing in outside agencies in addition to our own resources.
The other aspect you had mentioned that was relevant was the data retention change. You had said that it was an addition. Can you explain specifically what that means in the context of both the review required or the community?
Data retention is just something that gets updated periodically by the city of Duluth.
Okay.
And so I don't believe that had been done prior under that. So nobody had really looked at this from a standpoint of a department policy, but because that data is there, we need to have.
So it was effectively found that data was not compliant, or that there was
No.
policy regarding that? Or I'm confused why this hasn't changed.
I get, my assumption is that it was just something that had not been added to the city's data retention policy. And why that occurred, I don't know. That's outside of our purview, because I'm guessing they assumed that we were operating only out of, or at the time we were only operating out of the Violent Offender Task Force, which had an established drone program prior to this.
Could I just interject and say, does anybody have any questions for Sergeant Nykup in front? He's been standing up there a long time. So if there's not any questions for him, I want to give him the opportunity to break free from the front room there and take a break if he wants to. So does anybody have any questions specifically for him? Okay, Jason, thank you.
Oh, I'll sit down.
I think some of the issues that were brought up are good about privacy, it's a new technology, and people are kind of nervous about it, stuff flying over their heads, and the way I see it, a police officer on the ground can do the same thing that a drone can violate person's privacy. And that's been in existence since God knows when. So, you know, I think with policies to protect people's privacies, it's the same thing as it is for a patrol officer. There's certain things he can and cannot do because of statutes and laws. And that applies here. It's just a new technology. It's, wow. These things have got night vision. We've got a lot of technology on them. They're great.
We talk about privacy, but it's not just the local privacy. I mean, the state concerns, right? Like that's privacy on a global threat actor kind of level. And I don't want to get into conspiracy theory stuff, but it is an emerging technology, and we do not have, I think, a full understanding of all the implications of it.
I think the idea of an after action review after a year is a good idea. Let's review and see how it went, and everything's good, you know, what went right, what went wrong, what do we need to improve. And call it good after a year, or see how it goes. Maybe do that annually, just to make sure that people know, if you know what's going on, you feel more comfortable.
I'll be there.
So the more you tell people, the better they feel.
Can't get you guys' attention, so I'm just jumping in. How much did the drones cost? I mean, I imagine there's different kinds, but let's see, if you lose a drone, what happens? I mean, gotta buy another one?
Yeah, it depends on the drone. So the drone that's up there, I'm just gonna give you a ballpark figure, it's about $6,500 for that specific drone. It has infrared technology on it. Other drones that we deploy, around $1,000, somewhere in there. And the advantages for us, especially on our tactical response team, we use robots. So the robots that we use are anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000. So if we send one of those into our house and we're to get damaged, obviously we can see the cost that it's going to cost us. While a drone, most of the drones we would deploy into a house are probably under $1,000. And most of the damage we see inside of a residence is usually with the propellers. They hit something, they see the drone falls, and they can be easily replaced. The drone that's up there actually has cages around the propellers to try to protect it some. But of course, if the suspect were to shoot it or something, then we're unable to repair it. But the cost between a drone and a robot, there's a huge difference between those. Robots get stuck on furniture, clothing that's on the floor, any of that stuff, they get hung up in. While a drone, you can, if the pilot's good, they can fly it into a lot of spaces.
Still a lot of that's expensive, you know, like, or K-9,
Absolutely.
or an officer, or a civilian, or, you gotta look at that. Even with robots, the cost
Even
of
with
robots,
robots, yes.
costs, and, but $1,000, that's great.
I mean, I'm trying to ballpark. You can get cheaper, you can get way more expensive.
Coming up on 7:30, your time check. See if there's any last wrap-up questions.
Yeah.
And how will they get in touch with you?
Wrap-up question is kind of a funny one, so, I'm just curious, so, now, not police drones, obviously, but we talked about how there's drones, people have drones all over the place. If I'm sitting in my backyard and some drone comes hovering around, can I knock it out of the sky with something?
Oh,
You know what I mean? I hate it. I hate it. If I'm just walking around, I'll see, pick something up and throw it. I'm not sure. Do they have the right to just be in my space with it?
Well, discharging a firearm in the city limits, that would be.
Yeah,
I
you
would
wouldn't be able to shoot it.
I would throw a baseball at it.
These won't do that.
That would most likely fall back under FAA regulations in regard to flight, because I don't know if the training talks about where you can fly a drone with FAA approval. Maybe you know. Sir,
Yeah, basically, you can find it on a lot of maps, but there are marked areas over both downtown and by the airport.
Yep.
Altitude restricted zones.
So that's interesting, because during this comment period, there were concerns about, hey, I keep having this drone fly over my house, I don't know who it is. And it was actually somebody, a resident of St. Louis County, but they were interested in our public forum. And so we don't respond to a whole lot of calls for service related to drone activity. we all as members of the public see drones in popular tourist areas. Canal Park is a popular place where you'll see drones flying around. And that's where we want to, the reporting that we do, we don't want the public to assume that every time they see a drone in the sky, it's a police drone, because the likelihood of that is very, very small compared to the amount of drones that fly around. That's why we'll document and show why we deployed every time we did. But the general annoyance of, can that thing really be 200 feet above my head, over my house, or does it need to be 1,000 feet above my head? Don't know. And you talked about new technology involving drones. Drones haven't been around for a long time.
I mean, that particular point is actually an area of legal gray area, because we, in the case that was establishing precedence of the cops being able to fly over property, a dissenting judge, Supreme Court judge, mentioned that even at the time, the presence of civilians in that airspace helped define what a reasonable expectation of privacy is.
Yep.
But we don't have an updated definition for that, and it scares me that we're having to wrestle with that conversation in this room. I'm not an expert. I don't feel prepared to really do that. So why are we even putting ourselves in a position
Yep.
in the first place? Stick to warrants and clear cases.
It's regulated by like FAA airspace regulations. It's set like Duluth is Class C airspace from ground up.
Yes.
So it will always depend on where you deploy the police stop. There's certain areas when you have to get power approval. When you have to have ADSB on it, it's a certain way. It's a certain way. It has to go over 55. Okay. These are so small. But that way other airplanes will know this thing's floating around. You need to put little blue and red flashing lights on the
Some already have it.
so they don't get hit with a sound.
So we're coming up on 7:30, ladies and gentlemen, 2 hours into the meeting. The public comment period will remain open, like we discussed. If there are some questions that you want to submit directly to the police or through CRB or however you would like to do so, we will receive those. We appreciate the questions, we appreciate the comments and the thoughts, and we appreciate you being here. So thank you for that. We'll be around for as long as we need be, so if anybody wants to discuss. Chair, I don't want to cut a meeting short. I want you to, as meeting chair, I'll let you wrap it up, but I just wanted to offer that if there's people that would like to talk to the police for a little while longer, we're certainly available.
Any more public comment? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?